Well, my name is Esther Nunn, and I'm a registered nurse living and working in Central Australia for the last 10 years. I'm currently working in the emergency department in the Alice Springs Hospital and as a care coordinator for Western Desert Dialysis, working with Indigenous Australians with chronic kidney disease. And this is my colleague, Jem.
Hi, my name's Jem Walsh. I'm also a registered nurse living and working in Central Australia for the last 2.5 years.
Thanks.
And I'm not here on behalf of my organisation, but through that organisation I do work with Aboriginal people, and it is called the Western Desert Nganapa Walija Palyajanku Chutaku Aboriginal Health Corporation.
Or Purple House for short.
Or Purple House.
Thank you. That's a lot easier to spell. Thank you very much.
Here is a concerned health professional.
Thank you, thank you.
And we're also representing Health Professionals Against Fracking NT, which is a recently formed group of independent, self-funded collection of health professionals working in all fields of healthcare provision who are concerned about the negative health impacts of the fracking industry and the government-led processes which allow the industry to invade our landscapes and communities without appropriate health impact assessments and against the growing evidence that supports a total ban on this disastrous industry. I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute to the scientific inquiry into hydraulic fracturing in the Northern Territory and acknowledge the vital importance of the community consultation process. When decisions like this are being made that impact on our lives and pose such complex risks for our future health and well-being, our voices deserve to be heard. I'd also like to acknowledge the Aranda people of Mabuntua by recognising that we are on land that was stolen from them and that the impacts of colonisation continue to negatively affect Indigenous people's health and well-being. And I feel ashamed that the fracking industry is yet another looming burden of colonisation. The inquiry has already mentioned the majority of people who will be affected by the introduction of fracking into the NT are the Indigenous population living in remote areas. It is vital the panel understand the NT is not a vast wasteland that can be exploited. It is a living country, kept alive through culture and connection. I became a nurse because I care about people, and I want to spend my time and energy improving the health picture of our community. The fracking industry makes me feel angry and cheated because instead of being able to help people directly by promoting health, I'm having to spend my time and energy protecting my community from further harm. However, my practice is motivated and inspired by the Code of Ethics for Nurses as outlined by the Nursing and Midwifery Board of Australia, using principles and standards set out by the United Nations and World Health Organization towards a commitment to respect, promote, protect and uphold the fundamental rights of people. They help guide ethical decision-making and best practice and indicate to the community the human rights standard and ethical values it can expect nurses to uphold. There are 8 value statements in the Nursing Code of Ethics, and I would like to read out the one which I feel is most relevant to this presentation. Value Statement 8. Nurses value a socially, economically and ecologically sustainable environment promoting health and well-being. Nurses value strategies aimed at preventing, minimising and overcoming the harmful effects of economic, social or ecological factors on the health of individuals and communities. Commitment to a healthy environment involves the conservation and efficient use of resources such as energy, water and fuel. Nurses value and contribute towards strategies aimed at preventing and overcoming problems such as environmental pollution and degradation and how they contribute to ill health in the community, as well as working at minimising their harmful effects. This statement demonstrates we as health professionals have a moral, ethical and even legal obligation to our communities and the environment to ensure they are protected from harm, and it is this that it motivates me to be sitting here today. It's heartening to note that the opening line of Chapter 10 in the inquiry's interim report, acknowledging the rapidly growing number of scientific literature into the risks to human health associated with the fracking industry. For those in the audience, a categorical assessment of 685 peer-reviewed literature published in 2016 found 84% of the public health studies indicate a risk to public health. 69 of water studies show actual or potential water contamination, and 87% of air quality studies indicate elevated air pollution. It would seem, in layman's terms, a no-brainer that the fracking industry poses far too many risks to the health of humans and the environment to be suitable for anything besides a total ban. I'm grateful the Gunner government called for a moratorium and this scientific inquiry, which buys us precious time to provide the proof required to ram our point home and save us from the fracking industry. But it does seem ridiculous somehow when there are already states in Australia and entire countries in the world who've been through all this and come to the same conclusion we're pushing for, to ban fracking. Below are a list of health-related organisations and experts who have already provided strong scientific evidence stacking up against the industry and who health professionals against fracking NT align themselves with. Doctors for the Environment, who describe fracking as an uncontrolled health experiment and that the rush to exploit this resource has outpaced regulations to protect public health and the environment and to adequately assess the health impacts. The Australian Medical Association, who urge governments to use rigorous and independent health risk assessments. Australian Nursing and Midwifery Federation in Victoria and New South Wales, who called for a permanent ban on the industry. And Professor Melissa Haswell, who you are all aware is regarded as an expert on the topic of potential risks and impacts of fracking. The Public Health Association of Australia, who urges the government to use the precautionary principle, which I'll describe shortly. Trade unions against fracking, who are coordinated by Trade Unions for Energy Democracy and have released an inspiring statement calling for a global moratorium on fracking. They have an extensive list of unions across the globe, which include Nurses Against Fracking and Unions NT. Physicians, scientists and engineers for healthy energy and the 1,000 health professionals who delivered a letter to Barack Obama in 2014 urging for a ban on fracking, and Physicians for Social Responsibility, who put together an extensive compendium of scientific, medical and media findings demonstrating risks and harms of fracking. I think it's important to note here that this is a relatively new industry, and when attempting to determine the extent of the risks to humans and the environment, both now and into the future, it is impossible to evaluate long-term data which cannot exist until the industry has been operating for a time that could be considered long-term. We only have reliable data that dates back perhaps 20 years from when the industry took off in the US. We need to make sensible decisions based on what we're seeing and what can be predicted and use extreme caution. Because of the potential for long-term effects of even low doses of environmental toxicants and the cumulative impacts of exposures to multiple chemicals by multiple routes of exposure, often with incomplete information from fracking companies not legally obliged to disclose all ingredients and no known understanding of the consequences of these interactions, only time and research will tell. And this is exactly why healthcare professionals are increasingly calling for bans or moratoria until the full range of potential health hazards from fracking are understood. The evidence is mounting, but without the baseline health assessment you require, mentioned in the interim report, I have to pose the question back to you. Are you actually saying that in order to obtain the data you say you need to prove the extent of the health risks associated with the fracking industry, that you would require baseline before and after data from specific sections of the community? Is that what you're inferring? Who would put up their hand to be a guinea pig to test the health impacts of this industry? Besides that, it's completely unethical. However, I will continue my presentation by addressing the four main potential risks to public health categories as identified in the interim report. Impacts associated with contamination of aquifers. Fracking threatens drinking water. Contamination of aquifers happens due to well casings corroding, faulty construction and repeated fracturing. One study suggests 6 or 7% of well casings fail immediately, increasing to possibly 50% over 20 years as well casings naturally corrode and degrade. If there are no long-term studies available to a relatively new industry, how can we feel comfortable with these statistics into the unknowable future? Methods for handling and disposal of the millions of litres of chemical-laden wastewater that are brought to the surface in fracking operations remain problematic. In fact, Professor Haswell points out that there are no demonstrated long-term solutions for this hazardous wastewater management. There are many instances where spills, failures of holding dams and accidental or of contaminated wastewater have already happened in Australia. This poisons the environment directly and can contaminate waterways and aquifers through leaching. When the fracking industry tries to tell us about the tiny percentage of chemicals used in fracking fluid, they frequently omit the overall volumes they're talking about. If one fracking operation, which commonly uses 15 million litres of water and only 0.5 to 2% is chemicals, that still equates to 80 to 330 tonnes of chemicals. These chemicals aren't just found in household products. They don't like telling us about the toxic chemicals commonly used in fracking operations, of which that the tiniest amounts of some of these toxins is enough to cause harm to human health. These include carcinogens, neurotoxins, irritants, sensitizers, reproductive and endocrine disruptors. Endocrine disruptor chemicals interfere with the body's reproductive system and have been found in water at heavily drilled sites at concentrations high enough to adversely affect humans and animals. In one US study on several herds of cattle who were directly exposed to fracking fluids or wastewater, farmers reported increased reproductive problems such as failure to breed, failure to cycle, abortions, stillbirths, and birth defects above what they have ever seen in many years of raising cattle. Unborn babies and children are at increased risk from the fracking operations from things like EDCs. Many studies on fetus and babies have been made available because of vital records maintained by state health departments. So the records show a clear picture of the health the child was born with and show babies born in close proximity to fracking operations demonstrate alarming statistics with low birth weights, preterm births and birth defects. A study on over 100,000 live births reported babies had a 30% greater prevalence of congenital heart defects and marked increases in neural tube defects if their mothers were pregnant within 10 miles of fracking wells. Stillbirths and infant deaths, 6 times above the normal average in non-fracking areas over a 3-year period, have also been reported. Can you possibly imagine the distress you would experience if your baby was born dead? And worse still, if it could be attributed to an industry which omits responsibility because there supposedly isn't enough evidence. To me, it would seem then that the only way to guarantee our aquifers and our communities can be safe from fracking operations is to ban the industry completely. Impacts associated with fugitive emissions and airborne chemicals. Climate change has been termed the most important public health issue of the 21st century. Unconventional gas is predominantly methane, which is 85 times more potent in trapping heat than carbon dioxide over a 20-year period, which is a critical period for emission reductions. Professor Haswell states around 7.9% of gas extracted is released straight into the atmosphere. Haswell suggests that to continue this industry may accelerate the severe health impacts of climate change. The Public Health Association of Australia has stated that we need to focus on fulfilling our obligation to the Paris Climate Convention to mitigate climate change by urgently reducing fossil fuels, and methane emissions as part of the fracking process need to be examined with the utmost urgency. Drilling and fracking emissions contribute to toxic air pollutions and smog, ground level ozone, at levels known to have health impacts such as respiratory symptoms, sore or burning nose and throat, stuffy nose and coughs, exacerbation of asthma and COPD, chronic bronchitis and wheezing, and difficulty breathing. Vascular symptoms include nosebleeds and stroke, dermatological conditions, rashes and hair loss, gastrointestinal symptoms like vomiting, diarrhoea and cramping, and neurological symptoms like headaches, dizziness, difficulty concentrating, short-term memory loss, skin numbness and tingling sensations, incoordination, inability to stand, and seizures. Seizures have all been documented. Imagine if you were suffering strange symptoms that doctors couldn't put their finger on to give you answers, relief or help. And that again, if it could be attributed to an industry which omits responsibility and transparency because there supposedly isn't enough evidence and it's your job to prove it. Is it really worth the risk to wait and see just what emerges when the picture is looking so bad? Impacts associated with increased road traffic. The fracking industry will dramatically increase road traffic in the Northern Territory. It requires the use of heavy vehicles in all aspects of the industrial process to deliver equipment like bulldozers, graders and pipes, as well as chemicals, sand and water needed for well construction, fracturing and management of waste products. One study reports up to 1,000 truck trips for an average multi-stage well. The Northern Territory already has the highest road toll in Australia, at least 4 times the national average, and heavy vehicles are around 6 times more likely to be involved in a fatal and serious accident in Australia. And when these trucks are often carrying highly toxic fracturing fluids or flowback water, this also has the potential for catastrophic environmental damage. It is noted in the interim report that some industry submissions say driver training and promotion of safe work practices is a priority for the industry in addressing this potential risk. That sounds lovely on paper, but it does nothing to reassure us as road users in the Northern Territory, as no amount of promoting safe workplaces is going to stop the inevitable, as accidents do happen. The Bureau of Labour Statistics also states that 1/3 of all fatalities of oil and gas workers were due to traffic accidents. From a health perspective, the impact of motor vehicle accidents have on the emergency departments are enormous, and our hospitals are already understaffed and overcrowded. This can only increase pressure on the health system, including staff stresses, longer waiting times for patients in ED waiting rooms and longer stays in ED beds as staff attend to high priority injuries such as those seen in MVAs. I cannot understand how the panel claim that they are unable to draw any conclusion about this specific risk when surely a great increase in road use and truck traffic on top of the worst national road toll statistics would point in only one direction. Impacts on social cohesiveness, mental health and well-being. I note the panel has been unable to find any firm evidence that supports an evaluation of the magnitude of this risk, and that available studies of psychological impacts of this industry only allow the evidence to be graded as either insufficient or failing to show an association. It is insulting and upsetting to hear this because we feel it ourselves, and we see the impact it is having on other members of the wider community, such as in Queensland, where fracking has taken hold with disastrous consequences for rural communities. A study of 239 southern Queenslanders describes how the fracking industry negatively impacts on their mental health, with increased depression and anxiety about health impacts, loss or contamination of water supplies, falling property values and the polarisation of families and entire communities in for and against. When people can smell strange things in the air and they are experiencing strange health symptoms, how can you expect anxiety to not increase when we know how little is actually known as to the ingredients and interactions of these potentially toxic substances we are breathing in? Even reports of suicide have emerged directly linked to pressures from the fracking industry on farmers and their distress in seeing their livelihoods ruined. Can this evidence be insufficient or failing to show an association? Solastalgia is a term referring to the distress people experience by environmental change in their home environment. Exacerbated by a sense of lack of control over unfolding change, solastalgia was the main finding highlighted by the Queensland Department of Health assessment of the population with regard to fracking operations in their area. I'd now like to read an excerpt from the submission into fracking inquiry in March from Dr. Rosalie Schultz, who spoke on behalf of the Public Health Association. Here she describes the precautionary principle being of extreme importance with regard to the fracking industry. The precautionary principle describes when an activity raises threats of harm to health and the environment, precautionary measures should be taken even if some cause and effect are not conclusively established. In this context, the proponent of the activity, rather than the public, should bear the burden of proof. Considering the uncertainties about health, environment, local, social, global warming potential and economic implications, it would seem prudent to be doing more research and do delay any development until we've got more data. This sentiment has been repeated in many scientific health-related papers, and considering the issues the panel have described in the interim report being whether any of these public health impacts can be attributed to specific causal factors in the environment resulting from activities associated with hydraulic fracturing in the NT, it would seem obvious that precautionary principle be imperative so that any panel can make informed decisions and draw accurate conclusions which will affect us all. No matter how many different ways the fracking industry tries to reassure us they have the capacity to adequately monitor and respond to the many hazardous chemical, social, mental and physical health risks posed by the industry's operations, there is so much uncertainty, so many unknowns. We cannot accept this level of risk to our water, our air, our land and our communities. The government and the fracking industry will never be able to convince us that the fracking is safe, ever. The fracking industry in the Northern Territory will only increase the burden of health our communities face and place increased pressure on services that we already struggle to staff. I will conclude with a quote from Angie Giddis, a nurse from an emergency department in New South Wales in response to the fracking industry in her community. Health promotion and disease prevention starts at the environmental level. There's no point patching people up if we're contaminating them at the source. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive submission. You've obviously got references attached to some of the things that that's wonderful. Have we got a copy of that?
I can give you this copy.
If you will, just hand it to either of the individuals at the desk just on the way out, and then we will make sure that it's disseminated to the panel, and more importantly, it's up on the website as well.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. Now, any questions? Yes, Dr. Anderson.
A couple of questions. So thanks very much for that. I just want to ask a question about the health issues relating to coal seam gas development in southeast Queensland, and so the panel has spent a fair bit of time talking with various communities, and we certainly have been aware of the mental health issues, and you quoted some statistics there, and I'm just wondering if you've got statistics on the physical health side that have been separated from the mental health side, and so things like water contamination and air pollution. And do you have any statistics from the coal seam gas experience in southeast Queensland on that sort of more physical?
I think the only statistics that I can quote in my submission is the summary of the 685 peer-reviewed literature published in this last year, not specifically on Queensland. But as I've pointed out in my presentation, because it's such a recent thing that's come to Queensland, more and more statistics are going to be emerging as it becomes more clear. But if you need specific statistics about Queensland, I'm happy to go and find them.
What about South Australia? Have you got any information on or statistics on South Australia? Because they have been fracking for a number of decades. Shale fracking. Which
I've got no statistics on South Australia, but again, I'm happy to research and present it to you.
We would be most grateful for that. I say that in absolute sincerity. That would be fantastic. And you are going to be ideally placed to be able to find that information. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I did have one. It's been suggested by some of the, or at least some of the gas companies have obviously pointed to some of the benefits they claim would flow from this industry in terms of resourcing and infrastructure services and so on. When we were in Queensland, Arrow, I noticed that Arrow has providing resources and services with respect to various cardiac providers in the particular area. I think it was in Dalby that we were in. Did you want to make any comment on the ability of benefits?
Benefits to the fracking industry for communities?
Benefits by way of services, resources to health providers. It will, on one view, it's been argued that it will increase the amount of services and as I said, resourcing available. And an example of that was the partnership in Dalby between Arrow and a local cardiac health provider.
Oh, I'm unaware of that cardiac provider partnership, but again, I'm happy to look into that. Because I only had a 20-minute limit, I did have to chop out quite a lot.
Well, feel free if there's extra information and extra things you want to tell us.
I did have half a page about the impact of the fracking industry on workers and the way that the infrastructure can help or hinder communities. But again, I had to chop it out, so I can provide it to you later. No. I've only got my...
Okay, all right, fair enough, your oral delivery. Well, again, please feel free to put in...
Yeah, I'd like to speak to your point, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that it is unjustifiable to link access to basic resources that we should expect for our human rights, including proper access to healthcare, any kind of cardiac rehabilitation programs, to link that to... I suppose the exploration of people's traditional lands. There's a responsibility that all Australians have and the Australian government has to improve their services to Aboriginal communities and remote communities, and to try and, the term is, I suppose, bridge the gap, but it requires a totally different model of healthcare, and that model is oppositional to the model that could be the result of a partnership between a fracking company and a local community. It requires local community control. It requires solutions coming from the people who are affected by the health problems. And it should be funded not by... Corporations can fund it if they want to fund it, but it shouldn't be linked to funding from corporations and conditional on the presence of corporations in Aboriginal communities.
I don't think anyone here or on the panel would dispute in any way what you've just said, and indeed would agree with it. And I wasn't suggesting any linkage. It's just there are instances of, as I said, I know of one just because I happened to actually get the brochure because I was interested in it. I thought, oh, this is curious, of where a gas company has provided resources that has then allowed a medical service to be provided. As I said, I'm not in any way suggesting that should abrogate the various governments, either state, territory, or Commonwealth, from providing those services themselves. But I just wanted your comment on the potential for additional services to be provided with some resources coming from the gas companies.
I'd also have to say on that, though, I had to chop out of this presentation, like I said before, quite a lot of information, and I can present it to you later, but the statistics of what is emerging for people's cardiac, respiratory, intestinal, all those things that people are experiencing, which is putting increased burden on the healthcare system, is any additional help to services that the fracking industry might provide, could it possibly equal or outweigh what's happening in a negative impact sense? That's what I'm asking you now, because it's nice, it looks nice on paper, or it looks nice that the fracking industry has got into partnership with a cardiology department to help but they're actually really negatively impacting on people's hearts and their entire bodies and entire communities. So how do you weigh that up for benefits? And there's a lot of information that talks about, well, in fact, it's written in your interim report that the fracking industry claims that the industry is actually beneficial to the community. I cannot understand how that could be possible. I'm sure it is.
Where in the report does it say that?
I don't have the report in front of me, but it is in the chapter 10. It's in the health section. And
I would appreciate you furnishing me in due course then, or furnishing the panel in due course with where in chapter 10 that statement is made, in the way that you just described it.
It's quite in the beginning of the chapter, and the reason why I had to omit it out of my presentation, which could only be 20 minutes, is because it actually says that we are not allowed to talk about the health impacts of the fracking industry on workers in the industry, and I just find that astronomical because...
That's correct. I think occupational health and safety issues were specifically excluded in our consideration.
Yeah.
So we the terms of reference were drafted by not us.
I know, and that's why I had to chop it out of my presentation because I didn't have time. But it's challenging when an industry is actually reporting that it's beneficial to their workers and they're going to take responsibility for the health and safety of their workers when they're saying it's beneficial to their health and safety. But I have got so much evidence to suggest that it's actually incredibly detrimental to their health and safety, and that specific industry has an 8 times more fatality rate than other industries. I've got statistics on that.
Yep.
So, and if you want to talk about harmful effects of the chemicals that are far more potent to the workers in the industry, including silica, which creates silicosis and all kinds of terrible cancers, but the industry can still say that it is beneficial to the well-being of the community and their workers. I don't understand it. But anyway, I left it out because I'm not allowed to talk about it.
Any other questions or, yes, Dr. Beck?
I was just going to follow up. You have quoted a large number of statistics, and I just want to clarify that in detailing those statistics, you'll also provide the references that support those statistics, so that we can just have a look at the source material that quotes that you are quoting.
Absolutely.
The actual numbers, but we need the background source reference.
Absolutely. I've got 3 pages of references, and every
Fantastic. This is music to our ears.
single statement or statistic that I've quoted, I've referenced.
Excellent.
Thank you.
very much.
That is. I can't tell you how incredibly helpful that is. Thank you. Not everybody does it, so we're very grateful when it does occur. Yes, Dr. Jones.
I guess just following up on that, and one of our concerns certainly has been this issue of vehicular movement, because this industry potentially brings with it potentially thousands of increased truck movements and other things. And you mentioned that heavy vehicles are 6 times more likely to be involved in fatal accidents. Is that with other, like nomad road users and other smaller vehicle users, or is that intra-truck type accidents?
Does it matter? Does it actually matter?
It can matter in a sense, because we heard just previously that heavy vehicles that are using the existing roads are now being basically told not to drive at night. They're being told they've got to drive during the day. So what that does is actually increases the conjunction and probably greater likelihood of these accidents occurring. So once again, I think that's a matter which we do need to take on board.
I think the point being it can have a further detrimental effect.
Yeah, but when I hear that the panel is saying that they can't make any conclusive evidence of how an increase of trucks of the magnitude that is involved in the fracking industry, on top of the statistics that we're experiencing in the Northern Territory, which are 4 times the national average, I don't understand how you can't see that is going to have a massive increased detrimental effect.
Noted. Thank you. Yes, Dr. Anderson.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with the exact wording in the report, but I don't think anyone would suggest that having a massive increase in traffic does not pose a risk for increased accidents.
That's certainly one of our risk factors.
That's a course issue, but I'm not sure if it's as simple as that, because so would increases in tourism, and that we want to promote tourism as well, and we would know that would also increase the risk. And
of
so
course,
I think that's the context of further information and analysis is needed.
But I'm not presenting a submission about the detrimental health impacts of an increase in tourism on our roads.
No, of course
We're
not.
talking about the fracking industry, and if there's statistics that there's up to 1,000 truck trips for one fracking well operation, and the numbers that I see, there's 12,000 proposed wells for the Amadeus Basin. How many increased truck traffic is that going to be for Mark Swindells and his people down there at Yalara, and all the tourists that are on the road? There's no doubt that it's going to have a massive impact on road fatalities in the Northern Territory.
Yes.
Any for?
Yeah, I just, in terms of the estimates of truck traffic, it does depend upon how much water is required and the method of delivery. So it can be via trucks, but it can be via pipelines.
Yep.
So some of this information we are uncertain about at the moment, and we are trying to quantify a number of aspects. So there is uncertainty, some of this uncertainty can become clarified in the passage of time before the interim final report will be prepared. Other information may remain uncertain. So we're in a process of trying to gain greater clarity from where we are at the moment. And that's just one example where we will try to obtain further information.
I understand that, and I really appreciate what you're saying, but the time frame that we're supposed to be doing this and provide the evidence and assess it all and make informed decisions that are going to affect our future forever, we've got 6 months until the end of the year. You really think that you're going to be able to assess all this information and make really best practice informed decisions on the health and safety of everybody in the Northern Territory?
Well, just to clarify, we're not going to be making any decisions. That's the role of government. We will be making recommendations. This panel will be. Some of the recommendations may be that further information needs to be collected before we could recommend a decision being taken.
And that's why we're pushing so hard for the precautionary principle, because 6 months is not long enough to make it an informed decision on something as massive as introducing the fracking industry into the Northern Territory.
I appreciate that. I just need to reiterate what I said before, that this panel is not making any decisions. We'll be making recommendations.
I hope you make good ones.
As I said, I can't but reiterate what Dr. Beck has said. It's the job of government to make the decisions, not the job of this inquiry.
But they have employed you to gather the information and make those informed decisions.
No, I do have to correct you there. We are not making decisions. We are making recommendations.
Recommendations, sorry.
But it's an important distinction. And if we don't have enough data, then it may well be that our recommendation is that you, government, need to go away and get that data before you make any decisions. And we will have certainly no hesitation in pointing out where the data deficiencies are, where the gaps are, and saying, no, you need to go away and get that data, plug those information gaps, those knowledge gaps, before you go any further. We will have no hesitation in doing that.
And are you in a position to be able to say that you recommend a ban on fracking?
No, I'm not. That is not within our terms of reference. That is the job of government.
I hope that you can get enough evidence to recommend something in that direction so the government understands how serious it is from all this work that we're all putting into this.
As I said, I'm not going to repeat myself. As I said, I've hopefully explained what the role of this panel is and what the role of government is and where the two intersect.
Can I respond to what Dr. Beck said?
Absolutely.
Just regarding not having enough information to be able to speak to the issue of exactly how many truck movements would be happening and in where and what direction and the impacts it would have, do you think it would then be prudent to recommend that the moratorium on fracking remain until that information is available and quantifiable?
Well, I think just once again, just reiterating what Justice Pepper said, we're not going to be recommending maintaining the moratorium or recommending a ban. We would perhaps in that situation, if we don't have enough information by the time we get to the interim report, that could be a situation where we may, I emphasise may, say that's where we need to get further information and we'd make that as a recommendation to government in our report.
Mm-hmm. But the moratorium is a matter for government and only government alone. Any further comments or questions? Thank you very much for your very detailed presentation. I look forward to, as I said, I think you're going to drop off the written document to the task force sitting behind you, and whatever additional information, statistics, evidence you can provide to us, so we would be most grateful.
And when would you like that by?
As soon as possible is the answer. You know our timeline.
Thank you very much
again to both of you. It's
Cheers.
appreciated.